So you want to get started editing your photos in Photoshop, but you don't quite know where to start. Hey everybody, I'm Austin James Jackson, professional landscape photographer based here in the beautiful southern Utah. In today's video, I'm going to cover how I go about editing my images in Photoshop. I think one of the most important things you can do to get consistently great results in Photoshop is to establish a really solid workflow, which many photographers struggle to grasp. Even if you know how to edit in Photoshop, this video is still going to serve as a really nice way to show off my personal workflow, which you can either completely copy or you can pick and choose different things to add to your already existing workflow. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar, when I say workflow, I mean the way in which you edit your photos. So there's a process, whether you do X, Y, or Z first, and all those different things add up and create a workflow. So the way I edit is a workflow that I usually do the same things over and over again in the same order. So that is what a workflow is. Now, without rambling on any longer, I want to jump right in there. Here we go, guys. There's a few different things that I'll occasionally do first, but for this particular image, I want to show you how to do it in this particular order. So the first thing that I want to do is actually, if I want to make any warping, cropping, any kind of composition adjustment, I want to do that first. So on this particular photo, I might do a little bit of warping. So this is actually a pano, and it came out a little bit flatter than it actually was in the scene just because of the distortion. And when I put the pano together, this is how it ended up. So I'm going to fix that first. So I've got my background layer. I'm just going to click and drag down to the plus, which is going to duplicate that layer. I'm going to title this warp. Now I can go to Command T, which is transform, and Control click on a Mac, and then do warp. On a PC, that would be Control T and then right click, I believe, to get warp. And now I've got options to warp this photo. And you can see there is some pixels on the side here just because I have done already a slight amount of cropping, but I wanted to show you the majority of this. So I think what I want to do is move this over here just to kind of make this a little bit larger in the image. And at the same time, though, I need to pull this portion of the image back, pull this over here. I can use Command plus or Command minus to zoom in or out. Maybe I want to bring a little bit of that back. And you don't want to overdo this because you can see now my trees are getting kind of crooked, which is not good. But let's just stick with something like that. So always my first recommendation is to go in, do any warping or any other composition adjustments you want. You can go ahead and hit return, enter or return once you're done with that, and you can see the before and the after. So now this feels like it's in a much more workable spot. I'm going to double check to make sure my trees aren't too tilted over here. And you can see like this tree is getting really tilted there. So you want to make sure to avoid that. You can go back in and warp again. Just drag on the top here. And I've got a couple other tutorials where I talk all about how to warp and do other things like that to your composition. I'll link that video here so you guys can check that out. But the main idea of this whole video is not to talk about warping and stuff like that. I just wanted to show you this is kind of the first step that I take to my images. So this is looking pretty good. Now I can duplicate this and I'm going to call that base. I duplicated it by hitting Command J. You could also click and drag it down here. Now we're going to call it base. So what I want to do here is I want to actually turn this into a smart object. Now for a lot of you guys that don't know where everything lives in the Photoshop menus, I highly recommend just going up to help and typing what you need. So I want to turn this into a smart object. I'm going to type smart object, and then I'm going to convert to a smart object. That is going to convert this. There's a lot of benefits that a smart object gives me, but the main reason here is so that I can use the Camera RAW filter and any other plugins that I want and still be able to go back and adjust my image later. So I'll be able to come back in, double click and reopen the Camera RAW settings. Now you can see my image kind of looks a little wonky here because I've done that warping. That's fine. I'm not worried about it, but we are going to go through and just make some basic adjustments here. So I'm going to go ahead and just drop the highlights, increase the shadows. And these are the settings that you would have in something like Lightroom or any other editor. So they are accessible in Photoshop. So this is a great place to start on your image. And I'm probably not going to do anything else. I could maybe touch the vibrance and saturation, but there's a little bit better way to do that later on. So I'm not that worried about it. I'm going to hit the button below the delete key. I think that's like the /. See a before and after. You can see my image. The shadows are a little bright, but that's fine. I'm going to go back through and fix that later. But I just want to get the image to a nice workable spot. And then I'm going to hit OK. we'll let that load out. It's gonna take just a second, and there you go. Now you can see we have that. So now I'm gonna go in and use a couple plugins. I'm gonna leave links to all these plugins that I really like, but the first one is actually the Nik collection. So I'm gonna go into Filter, down to Nik collection. I'm gonna go over to Color Efex Pro 5 and let that load out. Now this is the Nik collection here. I think there's a new Color Efex Pro 6 version, but every time they update this, there's like not a lot of new stuff in my opinion. And to be honest with you guys, I'll leave a link down below. You can pick up this product if you want, but it's probably not something, unless you just have a lot of money that you want to spend on photography software, that I'd recommend buying, because you're gonna see I use it pretty lightly for just a couple of things. But anyways, the things I like to use here, I like to go polarization. I like to increase the strength on a photo like this. Not all photos you'll have great results with this polarization, but I like it on this photo. It's going to help me to bring out some colors. I'm also going to use pro contrast. We can slide a few of these sliders and see how they look, but usually the dynamic contrast and the correct contrast looks good. Then I'm going to pull up tonal contrast. When I use the tonal contrast here, I'm going to zero out all of these sliders. And I'm going to increase the highlights a little bit, increase the midtones, and I'm actually going to drop the shadows on this image just to kind of reduce the contrast in the shadows. So those are the three things that I like using. I used to use the sunlight a lot. I don't use that anymore. And I used to use the darken, lighten, center a lot. I also don't use that anymore. So I'm just going to hit apply. Like I said, I'll leave a link down below where you can pick it up, but I honestly, just for these three things, is probably not super worth it. But if you already own it, or if you own an older version, then you can do this and you'll really like it. All right, now you can see that these filters are stacking up here. So if we wanted to readjust one of them, we could double click, let everything reload out again, and then I could go in and make some adjustments. Probably about it for the plugins I'm gonna use on this particular image. The other plugins I like to use mostly, I don't really use On1 or Skyloom much anymore, but for Topaz Labs, Topaz Photo AI is phenomenal. Again, I'll leave a video for that here where you can check that out. That's good for denoising and sharpening, but this image doesn't really need either. You can see it's pretty low noise, and I don't think it really needs to be sharpened either. So we are going to be perfectly fine with that. So now the next thing that I want to do, I've got this base here. Now I want to really make some adjustments to the white balance, the hue saturation, and then do some contrast adjustments as well. And that's going to be like, this is the kind of the bulk of our editing here. First thing I want to do is bring up the hue saturation. So if you didn't already know, down here you've got your adjustment layers. So you can click that, you get a bunch of different adjustment layers. There's only a few that you need to know how to use, especially for landscape photography. I think that the ones that are really helpful are curves, hue saturation, and color balance. I occasionally use selective color, but if you're new to Photoshop, don't worry about that right now. So go ahead and open up, the first thing that I like to open up is color balance. That's going to allow me to just do like a white balance adjustment. With the addition, you'll notice in like Lightroom and Adobe Camera RAW here, you only have options for the warmth, which would be yellow to blue, and then the tint, which is magenta to green. This also gives you the option to change cyan to red as well. So you've really got a lot more options here for the color balance. So in this particular photo, I think we need to make it a little bit more blue. And I like to use my arrow keys on this. You can slide it, but you'll see that the effect works in pretty fast. So I just click right in here, and then I'll use my arrow keys to get it where I want. And I'm not worried about the water becoming too blue because I'm gonna go in and fix that next. Then I'm gonna go in and adjust the magenta and green. And even if you don't think that your image needs any adjustment here, I really highly recommend just going in and playing with these back and forth, toggling this eyeball to see the before and after, because I honestly think that you probably will find that most of your images need a slight adjustment. Because when I was editing this image, or when I first pulled up this image, I didn't think it needed an adjustment. But now that I've been looking at it for a couple minutes here, I see that it does need an adjustment. So this was before, this was after. You can see the change is very subtle, but I definitely cooled it down, made it a little more neutral toned, which is exactly what I want to do. Now we can go in here and open up a hue saturation layer. This is where we're going to do all things color. And a lot of times I'll use like 2 or 3 or 4 of these different hue saturation layers. But the first thing that I want to do here is I want to adjust the blues. So I'm going to go in, select blues here. Now that's going to make it so that anything I adjust, it's only adjusting the blues in my image. This particular photo, and what I like to do with a lot of waterfall photos, is I like to drop that saturation of the blues. It just comes in a little hot for me, somewhere right around there. And now I like to use Photoshop's layer masking here to adjust these blues. So I didn't like the blues over here in the image, right around here where my cursor is, but I liked them over here. So what I can do, click on my layer mask here, grab my brush tool. I'm going to switch it to black. I'm going to go up here and I'm gonna go 0% hardness, and then you can adjust the size as you see fit. And you could go with a lower opacity. It's probably better to do like 30-ish% or 10 to 30%. And then just go in and paint this out. So essentially what we're doing here, if you don't know how Photoshop's layer masks work, white reveals and black conceals. So anything that's black is gonna hide this layer from coming through, and anything that's white is gonna allow it to show. So now when I toggle this, you'll see we are no longer adjusting the saturation on the blues here. Again, I'm not going to focus too much on layer masks. If you don't know how to use layer masks in Photoshop, I'll link you to another video where you will be able to figure that out, but I don't want to talk too much about that in this video. So that's looking pretty good to me. Now I can go in also, I want to make some adjustments to the reds in the image, or the oranges, as well as the greens, but I don't want to do it on this layer because I've already painted on this layer mask. So if I was to say make adjustments to the oranges, they're not going to apply to the oranges around here where I've already hit it with paint. Let's go ahead and create a new hue saturation here. You can go in and let's do the greens first. I like to zoom in. So there's a lot of different ways to zoom in. My favorite way is either Command plus, or what I just did there was holding the space bar and pressing Command and then clicking and dragging to the right zooms in and left zooms out. So really easy way to do that. And you can get it just how you want it to kind of fill the screen. So again, I'm adjusting the greens here. So that's why I'm zoomed in, because I just want to see the greens. And basically what I want to do here, I want to first of all make sure that I'm actually targeting this color of green. So I'm going to click on the eyedropper tool here to allow me to sample a color. I'm going to sample this green right here. You can see how far that moved, and it's actually telling me, hey, this is a yellow rather than a green, so that's fine. Now we will adjust this. You can see how much power this tool gives you. I mean, I can make this fall color in a matter of 3 seconds. So super easy to do, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to make it look unrealistic. That's not going to look right. So I actually want to just go in. I just want to make these kind of greenish yellows a little bit more realistic looking. They felt kind of like strong to me. So maybe just adjusting the color a little bit. Now when I'm adjusting the hue, that's going to make it so that I change the actual color itself of the plants, whereas the saturation is going to increase the color intensity of the plants, and the lightness is going to make it brighter or darker. Honestly, I wouldn't use the lightness much on this hue saturation adjustment layer. It doesn't work very well in my opinion, because as you can see, you wash out the colors pretty quickly. You can use it slightly in moderation, but you don't want to use it a whole lot. I'm going to drop the saturation a little bit, and that feels a little bit better to me in terms of more realistic. As you can see here, I'm making some really slight changes here. There's not a huge difference, and that's good. You don't want to be making, I remember when I first started photography, I was making like massive changes. You don't want to be doing that. Small changes are the way to go. That's going to be how you keep a realistic looking image. Let's create one more hue saturation. Actually, we can do it on this same one here. I'll show you how I would do that. I can go in and I can either drag the master or I can change it to oranges. I'm actually just going to drag the master up. That's going to help me to increase the saturation of everything else in the scene. And I think that's looking pretty good. Again, slight changes. And if I wanted to go in, I could create a new hue saturation. I could drop that saturation. I want to paint out right over here because it felt a little bit strong to me. I've got my layer mask here that's white. If I hit Command I on a Mac or Control I on a PC, that's going to invert it to make it a black layer mask. So this layer is now doing nothing. Then I can go in with my white brush and I can paint over this spot here. I can just click a few times. I also want to hit this spot in here. It's feeling a little bright, or a little saturated, I guess would be the right word. Now I can toggle this and see how I've fixed the saturation in those two spots. So it's not overpowering anymore. And I feel like that is right where we want to be. Now lastly, I'm going to go ahead and grab a curves adjustment layer. And remember, these are the 3 adjustment layers you really need to learn how to use. I'm going to create a simple S curve here. So I'm going to just drop that a little bit. I'm going to just raise this a little bit. And essentially I'm brightening the brighter pixels and I'm darkening the darker pixels here. And then what I also have finally started doing, or not finally, but what I've basically figured out lately is that I can drag this very bottom and just bring it up a touch. You don't want to do it too far or else your image looks like really weird and matte. But you basically want to go until the output's at like 5 to 10-ish. And that's just going to kind of bring out those really dark areas. You can do the same thing by dragging the brights down just a touch, the very brightest spot. So essentially we're adding some contrast and then we're bringing back the very darkest and very lightest spots in your image. That's going to create a look just like that. That gives me kind of that almost like a nice finished look, and I really like the way that that makes my images feel. This might be just a hair strong, so I'm going to bring that down just a couple. And just like that, we're looking good. We might want to adjust the brightness because it's feeling a little bright up there. So I'm going to use a luminosity mask. If you guys don't or have not used luminosity masks before, again, I will post a video. Again, I will post a video where you guys can use or figure out how to use them. But essentially, I'm using the TK, the free panel here, which is great. I would highly recommend downloading it if you're a landscape photographer. Essentially, what this is going to do is just allow me to select the brights in my image. So for this particular image, I'm going to go with a brights 3. I'm going to click the curve. Then it's going to instantly give me a curve with a layer mask, just selecting those bright spots in my image. So now when I click and drag this down, you can see how that is just bringing down the brightness of the very brightest spots in the whole image. And I like that a lot. I'm going to reduce the opacity on that layer, but just like that. So that's a nice way to use luminosity masks. Again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about luminosity masks here, but that is how to use it. Now, one other thing you might want to do as landscape photographers, you might want to do some dodging and burning. I'm going to create a new group here, and I'm going to call this D/B for dodge/burn. I'm going to create a blank layer inside of it. It's really annoying how all these things keep popping up here. I wish I could turn them off. There probably is a way to turn them off, but I keep letting them pop up. But for those of you that are new, it's nice to be able to hover and read and see what stuff does and watch a quick video. Anyways, not to sidetrack here. So we've got our layer here in the dodge and burn folder. You're going to go ahead and change this to overlay blend mode, and then you can go ahead and dodge and burn. In this particular image, I might want to paint some light into here. So maybe I would go with like a yellowish color. And again, I just clicked over here to change my color. I'm gonna go with like a bright yellow somewhere up here. I'm gonna hit OK. And then I'm gonna go with my brush. We're gonna go 10% opacity. And we're just going to paint a little bit of light. And I'm clicking. You can see nothing's happening very fast. And that is by design. We don't want these changes to be crazy. We want them to happen slowly. And you could go in here, you could paint to your heart's desire. You could be the next Picasso here painting something incredible, but I'm not going to show a bunch of dodging and burning here. I'm just going to show you a couple things that I like to do. So first thing, I would like to brighten that little like tube or whatever you'd want to call that there. So I did it just like that. And then the second thing that I want to do, I'm going to create a new one and go to overlay. You could do it all on the same, but I like to do new layers here for each adjustment that I'm going to make. Then I'm going to paint like a blue in here. I want to sample this color actually so that I get the right hue. So I'm going to hit I to get my eyedropper, and then I'm going to hover in just like this, right about there. I'm going to double click or single click, I guess, on the color. And then I like this hue, so I'm not going to change the slider here. I'm just going to bring this straight up to the top because I want to paint a bright, like a white color to brighten it. I'm going to hit B to get my brush again. And then I can just go in here and I can click and drag. And I can brighten this up. Now, even though it might not look like I am, I promise you I am brightening this. I will show you in just a second. This is where if you have one of those Wacom drawing tablets, it's really going to come in handy. You are going to love it for doing stuff like this. I normally use mine. I don't have it hooked up right now just for the sake of this tutorial because I'm doing this kind of quick. But if you do have it, it'll help a lot. So before, after, before, after. So we've just, you can see that we've like really brightened this in here. And I think I'm happy with that. Now, lastly, I might create one more layer, and then on normal with that same color, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to click like a couple times down through there. And that might be a little extreme. Basically, what I'm trying to emulate here is like a little bit of mist down here. So obviously isn't something you're going to do on every photo, but when there's water, it is nice to kind of make it a little brighter just to give you kind of the look of like there's a lot of mist, a lot of water spraying, because if a lot of water is hitting down here, then you'll be creating a little bit of mist. Just like that. I feel like that's good. So dodging and burning, you can see I've done a few things here. You could do a lot more. You could go burn the rock up here. If you wanted to create a new layer, you could go overlay. You could come in here with a black brush and you could just come in here, paint that rock. I'm not going to do that because I'm going to put a vignette on my photo at the end, which is going to darken that for me. So I'm pretty happy with where it's at right now. Now, really the last kind of steps that I like to take on my image here is I like to do something called a final pop. And this is something that I figured out a long time ago, and I've been using it ever since. The way that you want to do this, you want to go Command, Alt Option, Shift, and E, which that is going to create a new flattened layer. This is everything below it. Now I can hide all these layers below it if I want, and this is just going to show through. So I like to call this pop, and then I'll show you guys how I do this. So you're gonna go up to Filter, and you're gonna go down to Sharpen. You're gonna go to Unsharp Mask. You're gonna change the settings to 30, 40, and 0. You're gonna hit OK, and you're gonna let that load out. Now when I zoom in, you can see it's very crunchy. A lot more than we would want. So I like to do this from zoomed out, and I'll usually always adjust this to 30%, and that's usually good for me. Before and after. The changes should be subtle when you're all the way zoomed out. You should be able to see them when you zoom in. So I like what that's doing. I'm happy with that. That's just something that I kind of put on my photos at the end. Just a basic little thing that anyone can do really quickly. Now, the last step here, and I feel like I've said last step a few times, but this really is the last step, is to make a vignette. So I want to show you guys how I make a totally custom vignette in Photoshop. You should definitely be doing your vignettes like this. Trust me, I'm going to show you guys why. So I'm going to create a new folder here, and we're going to call this Vin for Vignette. I'm going to create 2 layers inside of it. I'm going to change both of those layers to Overlay. Now we're going to grab the elliptical marquee tool, otherwise known as the circle selector. I'm going to click and drag in the center of my photo, and essentially I'm just creating the circle that I'm going to be vignetting. So one thing that a lot of people don't know, they'll start to draw the circle and they'll be like, oh shoot, it's going outside. Hold the Alt Option key, and then it will create from the middle. So you can make it just like that. If you're not worried it's not in the middle, you can click and drag it and it should snap on both axes. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna go to Select, and you're gonna go to Modify, and you're going to go to Feather. You're gonna feather it by 1000 pixels. Then you're gonna go to Edit, you're gonna go to Fill, and you're gonna go to White, click OK. Then drop the opacity of this layer that you just put it on to 30. And we might drop that again later, but we'll see. Then, and sorry if I'm going too fast here. This is the kind of thing where you're going to want to pause and do it yourself so that you can see how it all works. I just didn't want to like lull on about it forever. For those of you that are just going to pause and play. Then you're going to click on your other layer here. Make sure you select your other layer. If you don't, you will regret it. Trust me, double check to make sure you checked the other layer. Then you're going to go to Select, you're going to go to Inverse, then you're going to go to Edit, Fill, and Black. You're going to hit OK. Then you can hit Command D or Control D to exit. Now I know what you're thinking, that was a lot of work for a vignette that looks like absolute crap, but I'm going to show you guys why you want to do it this way. So now you're going to take layer 5, or I guess whatever layer it's called on your photo, the darkening layer. You're going to hit Command T on Mac, Control T on PC, and then Control click on Mac, right click on PC, and hit Warp, and then hit Command minus on Mac or Control minus on PC just a couple times, and then you can warp this vignette. So the cool thing is you're going to totally custom build this vignette for whatever photo you are using it on. And I like that because some photos I want a stronger vignette and I want it stronger in some places than others, and other photos I don't want that strong vignette. And I'm just going to drag this over. I don't want it to be super dark on the trees there, but I want it to be dark in the foreground. I want it to be dark on the sides, which I think we're doing a good job of. You can hit return when you think you're done. So you can see how much I warped the vignette out to the left on the top left, and then I warped it in on the right side. So now you can see that is the effect that we've created. Now you can go in here if you need to make any adjustments, and you could put a layer mask. Now I want to show you guys why we put that white layer in the center, because it's going to help bring some attention. On this particular photo where there's so much that's really bright in the center, we want to drop the opacity, but on a lot of other photos, I think you'll find that 30% feels just right. And I think that's looking good. So once you're done with that, that's pretty much going to be it for Photoshop. That is how I go about using Photoshop in order to edit my landscape photography. And this is really the workflow that I'd recommend you guys follow. Watch this video over and over again as you edit your photos. Do things kind of in the same order. Obviously, each photo is going to call for different things, but you kind of get the idea of the steps that we went through here. We did the warp first, then we converted to smart object. We did a couple filters on it. We adjusted the color balance. Then we did the hue saturation stuff to adjust the color in the image. Then we did some curves layers. We even used a luminosity mask. Then I did some dodging burning. I applied that pop layer, and then I did the vignette. So that's my personal workflow. Pick and choose what you want to add to your workflow, or just totally copy my workflow if you don't already have one that's solid. And I think that this is really going to help you to create some better photo edits. Hey, thanks so much for checking out this week's video. Now, trust me when I say that using Photoshop is going to unlock creative potential like you've never had before. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you guys next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.